Good evening, everyone. It's Dr. Jen Kordonsky from Optimal Spine Chiropractic, and we are here live this evening with our class, Sitting is the New Smoking, which is kind of a funny title. It's a headline that I saw many years ago, and I think it fits perfectly, and I want to elaborate on the title a little bit. So there was a time when people smoked without the knowledge that it was as hazardous for their health as we now understand. If I were to just light up a cigarette, you would be shocked, I would imagine. When we watch old movies, we can get a little bit of a sense of it, but doctors advocated or advertised what their favorite brand of cigarette was. My mom is a NICU nurse. She works in a hospital, and when she graduated nursing school, she would work at the hospital, and the nurses would be smoking at the nurses' station around these little premature newborn babies in the respiratory units, I'm sure. So there was a time when people smoked as if there was no consequence to it, without the knowledge that it was so dangerous to a person's health. Now, people still smoke, but no one is without the education, the knowledge that they know they're doing it, even though there's a consequence to it, even though it's not a healthy thing for their body. So we're fully informed today, and we look back at these old movies or old advertisements and think like, oh my gosh, that's so foreign to us. We wouldn't think ever of our doctor advertising or advocating for a certain brand of cigarette. That would be unheard of today, because our knowledge, our understanding has changed so drastically. Sitting today is just like smoking was back then. We're all doing it. It's completely normal. It's completely ingrained in the way we live our lives. We sit a lot, and we don't even really think about how much of a toll it's taking on our body. And I think that someday we will look back, and we're starting to see a shift, right? You've probably heard of these standing desks, or you realize that the time, especially if you shifted from an office to working at home, hunched on a laptop, you've probably started to get a sense that the time you spend sitting in front of your computer is taking a physical toll on your body. It's taking a much larger toll than we realize. And there's a lot of research that's come out in the last decade about how much sitting is impacting our health and our well-being. It's a very clear connection between the amount of time that an individual spends seated and rates of chronic diseases. And many times that just doesn't seem like it makes sense unless we're saying, well, I guess if a person spends a lot of time sitting, then they probably aren't a person who exercises. Maybe if they're not a person who exercises, they're also a person who doesn't eat healthy, and then it's those things that are causing the disease. But what's important to understand is that there is a direct connection between the hours spent sitting, not necessarily tied to other lifestyle factors. So for example, if somebody spends 8 hours a day sitting, but they then spend an hour a day at the gym, that hour a day at the gym does not undo the damage that the 8 hours of sitting does to their health. And there is a reason for that, and I'm going to explain that in a second. But I just want you to become very aware of how our lives have changed so drastically to the point where we are doing something so harmful to our bodies, yet it's completely natural and normal and completely accepted. But if you think about the influence technology has had on our lives, you really realize that there were so many things that we were doing physically or manually, or getting up to go talk to someone, we had at some point to seek our own food and our own shelter, and take care of, getting things to our own, even getting our own water, for example, when now we can call or text on an app and have everything delivered to us. We don't even necessarily, I'll be the first to admit, I call my son up from the basement on the Alexa, on the intercom. I don't bother running down there to go get him. So technology has changed our lives very dramatically. 20 years ago, or more, whatever it was now, I got my first cell phone. I was in chiropractic school, I was in graduate school. I had not had a phone before that, and it definitely wasn't a smartphone. So in the last 20 years, that has revolutionized so many things about our day-to-day living. But think about 100 years ago. There's a big difference, right? With automobiles and all the changes that have been made. Think about 200 years ago, 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago. Nothing is the same, right? The way we live our lives, the way we do everything is completely different. And we have become much more sedentary. We use our brains and our fingers more than we use our bodies. But the human body has not changed that drastically in 1,000 years. The physical structure of our body is still the same. Our genetic makeup is still the same, but our lifestyle is almost unrecognizable. It's like taking us and putting us on a different planet to think of the difference between the way we live our lives today and the way we lived our lives 1,000 years ago. And yet the human body is still the same. So we're trying to make it work. We're trying to help it thrive in an environment it's really not built for. The human body is meant to move all day, every day, in a variety of ways. So even if you happen to have, I'm fortunate that I don't sit at a desk to do my job. I don't even technically have a desk here. I am physically active when I'm working. However, I tend to do the same type of movement over and over. There's not a wide variety in the movements that I do. So early humans, who were wandering, hunter-gatherers, spent a lot of time walking around, then they would bend, then they would lift, sometimes they'd have to run, sometimes they'd have to lift something heavy, but it wasn't the same old all the time, but there was a lot of movement all the time, and our bodies thrive on that movement, a wide range of movements through all of the joints. So all of this sitting that we do is really creating a problem for our health and our well-being, not just physically, but mentally as well. So why is it? So the human body is designed to sit, the joints bend in such a way. It's not the actual act of sitting down. It's the amount of time that we spend sitting primarily, and how we sit has a big impact as well. So let's talk about those two things. First of all, how we sit. Typically, when someone sits down, they tend to kind of round their spine into the chair. The shoulders come forward. If we think about making the letter C with our body, that's kind of what happens. When there's supposed to be a forward curve in the lower back, the head should be up over the shoulders, and just slumping down like this reverses those beautiful curves. My favorite analogy for this, and I want to forever be in your head with this, is think of a light switch. In the up position, the light switch is connecting the circuit and electricity is flowing to the light bulbs, the lights are on. As soon as we flip that switch down, then we cut off the flow of electricity to the light bulb and the lights go out. So think about you being upright posture. The power is on, the electricity is flowing from the brain down the spinal cord through all of the nerves to all of your vital organs. And if you go like this, click, it's like shutting off that power to your body. This is the reason why the number of hours spent sedentary correlates to the rates of chronic disease, and it does not matter if that person exercises or not, because those hours were sitting with the power turned off to all of those parts. Now, your body is highly intelligent. It's not going to just shut off the flow of information. There are multiple nerves that go to every organ, gland, and blood vessel and muscle in your body. So there's backup. But when the spine is aligned and healthy and in its ideal position, we are much better off than when it's out of alignment and we're creating stress and interference and slowing down or interfering, blocking some of that transmission of information between the body's vital organs and the brain. And that is exactly why. So when we sit, we have to sit with good posture. Our head should be back and up over our shoulders. There should be a little curve in the lower back, maybe a pillow to support that if we're going to have to spend a while sitting. But it's crucial that even if you sit with perfect posture, we move more often than we are. So setting a timer on our phone, having some cue, if the phone rings or we get a text message, that should be our indicator to just stand up and sit back down. One of the studies that I found so fascinating showed that just interrupting this time spent sitting every 20 minutes was just as effective as a bout of exercise at the end of the day. So just breaking up the time we spend sitting. Stand up, sit back down, but sit with good posture. Every time the spine moves, we have it stimulates the flow of fluid around the brain and spinal cord. There's not a pump like your heart that pumps the cerebrospinal fluid. The fluid that bathes your brain and spinal cord is moved when you move your spine. It's called the sacro, so your sacrum occipital, the base of your skull pump, the sacro-occipital pump. So when your spine moves, those two bones actually flex and extend and pump the fluid that bathes your brain and spinal cord. So I always ask, what do you want your brain sitting in? A pool of stagnant pond water or a nice fresh stream of crystal clear flowing cerebrospinal fluid? I want my brain sitting in that crystal clear stream, and then my mental processes are going to be that much more efficient. A Nobel Prize winning researcher taught us that 90% of the stimulation and nutrition to the brain comes from the movement of the spinal joints. So if you have vertebrae that are stuck, i.e. a subluxation, then you have lost out on movement from those joints. Now above and below might move, but you're missing the movement in that joint. So that's going to inhibit the stimulation and nutrition to the brain, therefore contributing to less than optimal mental clarity and mental function, less than optimal cleaning of waste products from the brain. And at that local level, where that vertebra is out of alignment or stuck and jammed, the disc that's in between is not going to get squeezed and released by the movement of the spine, and then it's not going to stay hydrated and nourished, so that disc will start to deteriorate from the lack of movement. So each individual vertebra of your spine, each spinal segment, ideally needs to be freely movable, and that's why we check your whole entire spine. Every time you get adjusted, we feel the whole spine, not just spots that might hurt. We check the whole spine for that intersegmental movement, and where it's stuck, that's one of the ways we know we need to adjust there. So you have to take that now healthy spine that is movable, that's been adjusted, and it's unsubluxated, and then move it yourself frequently and in many different ways. So that stand up, sit down, take a little stretch break. You don't need to do a 10-minute stretch session, but a couple times a day, if you stopped and did 2 minutes of stretching, what a huge benefit to your physical and mental health. And because of the way it stimulates the brain function, you're not going to lose productivity if you pause for a moment and do a few stretches. So we have to interrupt how long we're sitting. We have to make sure that our spine is well cared for, regularly adjusted, so all the segments move. And then you have to add movement intentionally to your day. So yes, I want to see you have some sort of formal exercise in your life, a variety, cardiovascular, strength training, flexibility, balance training, but intersegmented through your day, little spurts of movement. Look for those golden opportunities to run down the basement stairs rather than send the text message, or go down the hall, park a little farther, take the stairs. Look for ways to add movement. Every little bit is something beautiful that you're doing for your physical and mental health. So that's another way of, if I can't carry all the grocery bags in one run and I have to make an extra trip, I don't get aggravated. I just say, well, there we go. I can get, more movement into my day. There's a benefit there. Or if you forgot something and you have to run back, try not to think of it as an inconvenience, but rather an opportunity to do something beautiful for your body. I want to show you just a couple quick stretches that will interject into your day very easily, especially if you're spending time sitting at the computer doing this. We need to open up and stretch the pecs and get those back muscles working and strong. So my favorite is the crucifix stretch. So palms are out, posture is good. You can do this standing or seated, and just squeeze the shoulder blades together. Get those muscles in the back working and the muscles in the front stretching. Make sure that your head is not forward, that it is up and back when you start the stretch, right? And then the chin tucks, easy peasy, just pull back and just open up those joints, get some movement in the spinal joints of the cervical spine. Even if you're just sitting there reading for a little while, those joints are not moving and they're not getting nourished with that fluid in the disc. Then most important for anyone who spends a lot of time sitting is the hip flexor stretch. Our hip joint is a ball and socket. It is meant to move all the way around, and most of us are doing stand up and sit down, and that is the range of motion that our hip experiences, not that full circular movement that a hip is meant to have. So if we never take the hip through a range of motion, well then you're going to start to create adhesions in the hip and you're going to lose those ranges of motion. Think of a rusty gate. If you just lock it and you don't open and close that gate, well, it's going to rust shut. And that's why hips wear out. Now they wear out unevenly because bodies are out of alignment and people don't know that they should be getting their spinal alignment and their hips aligned on a regular basis their entire lives, not just if they have pain. So great to move the hip in a wide range of motion. Look for exercises, where you kick to the front or kick to the back, squats. Take the hips through some ranges of motion. Your hip joints will be happy. If they're not ready for it, you just have to slowly add the movement, but they will be grateful in the long run. But the hip flexor stretch, super simple, but very important for the health of the hips and really important for the health of your spine, because this muscle will really affect the whole spinal alignment. So you want to get into the lunging stance and don't let your tail stick out, tuck it under, kind of lean into it, and you'll feel a stretch in the front of the thigh here, front of the groin, and that's the hip flexor stretch. Last one I'm going to show you, because it's really easy to do when you're at work or you're stuck sitting at a desk, is the figure four. So you cross your legs like a figure four. Now you might be tight and you might be here, or you might be more flexible and you can drop it down. Just wherever is good for you. Work on getting it more flat, but make sure you are staying as upright as possible. Don't be like this because the hip is tight, right? Once you get the leg crossed, then straighten up. And once you're here, then you're just gonna lean forward into it. Don't slump forward. hinge at the hips. Bring your chin and your chest forward like this. And you'll feel a nice stretch in the side of the hip and the glute. And that is a fabulous stretch for people who've been sitting a lot. And it's really good for keeping your sacrum and your hips in good alignment, helping you preserve the integrity of your adjustments. So, sitting is the new smoking. Don't get caught being an ex-sitter. Interrupt the sitting now, add more movement to your life so that you can build your health and not just let it slip away from you. It's a small thing, but it will make a big difference in your life. So if you need some help with any of the stretches, have any questions, make sure you reach out to us. Make sure you comment that you've watched the video so we can get your attendance and get you in the raffle. And I appreciate all of you who are here live and look forward to seeing you all soon. Take care.